You're looking at two power plants generating over 18 gigawatts of power. And those buildings were made with one main universal blueprint and two auxiliary blueprints for top and bottom. And those auxiliary blueprints handle byproduct resin and produce extra power or packaged fuel for dimensional cloud when necessary. It literally takes more time to connect oil and water than to build those two huge Brutalist towers with blueprints. In this video, I would shortly explain the type of power plant in use. Then, I would brief you on previous iterations of fuel power blueprints. Next, I would explain the evolution and benefits of this new design. And finally, I would explain the interesting bits about Brutalist exterior. You know, creating modular power plant with blueprints in Satisfactory is very powerful tool. While one can argue that something like blueprint factories is just over-the-top disposable gimmick, well, something like blueprint power plant is too convenient to skip for any Satisfactory player. Once you create modular power plant, you can use it on multiple occasions across multiple saves. After all, power demand is the major limiting factor to scale your factory. Oftentimes, building an extra power plant becomes, well, a bit of a chore, especially during factory expansion. And here is where modular blueprint power plants fit perfectly. Mid-game fuel power plants are one of the most commonly used power sources. It is relatively simple mid-game power source, and with Satisfactory 1.0, fuel power have received major buffs. Now, we have very convenient 5x5 Mark II blueprint designer, and fuel generators now generate and consume more power per physical machine. I have already done fuel power blueprints on 2 occasions, and this would be the third. Every time, I am able to make it more convenient and efficient. And in Satisfactory 1.0, there are a lot of things to pack and unpack with diluted fuel setups. The main idea was to create massive Brutalist tower that converts 300 crude oil into over 9000 megawatts of power. Previously, I have released coal power plant disguised as Art Deco skyscraper. It was early access blueprint pack on my Patreon. Now it is available for free. Just sign up and download. patreon.com/Yakez. Today's blueprints also available on my Patreon. There will be Satisfactory 1.0 updated fuel power plant as totally free pack. It is fully functional, probably not as convenient as new thing, but still very interesting package to play around. And my Patreon supporters would also get this new Brutalist tower with all the auxiliary blueprints in early access. I know that not everybody have the means to support my work, and it is totally fine. Just subscribe to my channel, sign up to my Patreon and watch my videos so you'll never miss when the early access blueprints go free. It also helps me to grow my channel quite a lot, so huge thanks! Alright, so what is under the hood of my blueprints? Well, the key recipes here are heavy oil residue and diluted packaged fuel. Compared to basic fuel setups, if we introduce water, we can bump up power generation more than 200%. This is 2 with double zeros, 200%. By simply introducing 2 packagers, packing water and unpacking fuel in a canister loop, we get this incredible gain in power. And this is tier 5 to 6 mid-game power setup. There are no blenders involved, just refineries, 2 packagers, canisters, water, and diluted packaged fuel alternative recipe. This gets even more ridiculous when you compare this with turbo fuel, that only gets you like extra 25% power and required to have 2 blenders and consume sulfur. Yeah, turbo fuel is not great. Canisters in this setup are on the loop. Nice trick here is to input stack of canisters into the water packager in the blueprint itself. Once you place, connect and power up blueprint, the canister loop would automatically start. This is one of the reasons why I made empty canisters in my Dimensional Cloud personal storage steel factory. Now I can build the canister loops at any time and place. Next focal point is to understand production ratio. Fuel generators are now consuming 20 fuel units by the default. We will need at least 2 refineries, 2 packagers, and probably some battery backups aside the fuel generators. While 5x5 can fit 4 fuel generators, those extra machines will not fit. So realistically, we can only use 2 fuel generators. Oil conversion rate in refineries lead to heavy oil residue at 75% and diluted packaged fuel at 100%. Would avoid going further since it would require quite the use of power shards, and this would also decrease the power efficiency of the power plant. After all, we will lose around 10% during the power generation by default, and I do not want to increase that number even further. Also, packagers fit quite nicely at 100% with these refinery ratios. As for two fuel generators, well, they would require the kick to 150% with one power shard each. And this is fine, since there is no downsides at all when you are using power shards on the power generators. In the end of the day, 150% fuel power generators would consume exactly 60 fuel. And now, we need to understand how we can stack this blueprint, and this is like the perfect opportunity to showcase how it was done before and how I'm evolving this one-click fuel power once again. First iteration of modular fuel power plant was relatively simple. I started by doing basic fuel setup in a row, clean and simple, no byproducts, but well, dreadful efficiency. Then I expanded this idea to a diluted fuel setup. First challenge was to deal with increased amount of blueprints to cover one node of 300 oil. Second challenge was to deal with byproduct resin. End result was vertically stacked blueprints in several horizontal lines, usually bound by amount of water in the pipe. Also, I have made the byproduct resin manifold to sink it into external awesome sink. It was a decent solution, but I felt that I can do better. Also at the time, I had no idea that one can put canisters into a blueprint itself instead of a manual setup. This is why the next power plant idea came to be. First idea was to double stack blueprints back to back to decrease overall building footprint. Second was the idea to make byproduct resin manifold workable from any end. It is a very basic idea where, thanks to splitters and mergers with two belts, we can move byproduct resin into any connected direction. This is so-called omnidirectional sockets. Next idea was to deal with byproduct resin internally, so I made a fake empty module with awesome sink inside. Also, there was idea to do some sort of a factory inspired by Le Corbusier apartment building in Marseille, France, so I made this Brutalist foundation support, and this foundation is working quite well with the Spire Coast biome, because well, we have a lot of oil there, and it's kinda on the water, so yeah, it kinda fits. Facade design was more in line with Art Deco, and I decided to finish the building with use of decorative painted beam crown. The initial ratios was bound to fuel balancing of update 8, mostly tied to 300 water per level, and I have updated this blueprint to work with Satisfactory 1.0. And now you need less blueprints to achieve the same results, but well, common denominators for oil consumption and water use for this back-to-back blueprint style, well, it does not match as well as before. And in the most cases, to finish the building exterior, you will need to add a couple of fake and empty shells. Also, the weak point of blueprint layout like this was the connections on the side. They are just there and do not work well with the exterior, so I ended up with some sort of a blueprint cover to hotfix the exterior. Obviously, this was more of an issue with total lack of space in 4x4 Blueprint Designer. Now with 5x5 Designer at hand and new fuel ratios, I decided to go into a different direction and fix all those small issues of previous designs. So, let's check out the new Brutalist blueprint. First focal point is to decide on the way how I can stack this schematic. On the drawing board, I was in favor of making 4-way symmetry stacked multiple times vertically. I like to work with Mark I pipes, and I want to limit one building to 300 crude oil. And this results in 13 blueprints. Totally inconvenient prime number, you know? I want something vertical, and 12 stacks just makes more sense in 4-way symmetry. But this leads to an issue of 30 oil being just useless. And at this stage, I decided to make one main universal blueprint for 12 stacks and secondary blueprint to handle 30 oil on top of a building. With introduction of dimensional uploaders, we can make very interesting solution where we have packaged fuel factory on top of 12 stacks. 30 oil would be more than enough to make packaged fuel on top. And this is how we'll have access to packaged fuel from the cloud to use in the jetpack or personal vehicles. Next, I have made a smart splitter system in a secondary blueprint. The system, where once buffer and dimensional cloud are full, packaged fuel would start to unpack and fuel the fuel generator. It is not efficient, but still some extra power. Over here, we have awesome sink that can handle all the byproduct resin from the main blueprints. Also, this awesome sink would deal with unpackaged canisters. Canisters itself are made from plastic that is basically converted from the byproduct resin. Yep, it is so cool and completely self-sufficient. And I made this top blueprint in two variants, both 6x6 and 5x5, But I feel like 6x6 just looks better visually, and game does not really care what blueprints you export, and once you unlock the 4x4 designer you can just plop pretty much anything. And while I was making this script, I had an idea. Why not to deal with 30 leftover oil in a different manner? Packaged fuel is nice, but plopping it every time I convert 300 oil into power, well, it is redundant. So, I decided to make alternative secondary blueprint that is 100% sink and fuel power. Obviously, converting 30 oil into power would require a bit more of overclocking, but extra gigawatt of power with 80 fuel can overcompensate for that. Obviously, I made this blueprint in 6x6 because, well, I prefer 6x6 look, and also it have enough space to fit the awesome sink, and I still want to have the awesome sink there because I want to sink the byproduct resin, etc, etc. And right now I want to talk about the connections itself between all the blueprints and the final top blueprint. With schematic and stacking done, now we need to pay close attention to connections and internals. Very early on, I decided to make some sort of an exposed shaft on the facade of the building. Here I can have two pipes with all the connections of water and oil. By the nature of blueprint stacking to convert 300 oil in this project, I can get away with only one set of pumps on one side of the building for oil. For water, I need pumps on every side. This sort of dictates the presence of pumps in every blueprint by the default. I can pretty easily interconnect the oil with the top blueprint, and once one side is set, I can just delete all the extra pumps on other three sides for oil and let the gravity to do all the work. For water, it is not as convenient. I can't really play with 300 water anymore, and I just opted for 180 water for every 3 blueprints on one side of a building in one pipe. This corresponds to one water pump at 150%. What a nice round number to work with. And obviously top blueprint require either 10 extra or 80 extra water, but this is like easily set by extra overclock for one extra water pump. Here in the case of Canyon, I was able to make basic water tower for both buildings and even removed all the pumps for water. Gravity rules. Another thing to consider was manifold for byproduct resin. It is very easy to set up, and all you need to bring the resin from 3 blueprints to the top and then connect 4 sets of lifts to the top blueprint with the awesome sink. As usual for my power plants, I do my backup power and generators on 2 separate chains. Once again, shaft design allows for very easy setup for 2 chains, and for the backups I am able to put exactly 800 megawatts of battery storage to correspond to, well, power output of fuel generators. I usually prefer my blueprints and power plants to have the similar backup in size to power output of, well, power generators, or maybe to have it a bit slightly higher, although there is enough space to put even more batteries if necessary. Next, I made the bottom foundation blueprint. Main purpose here is to manage pipes. For example, I can have the extra connections for oil, so I can just bring my single oil line from any side or any direction and just then pipe it upward with any side, whatever. Like, you know, it's omnidirectional, as I prefer to say. For the water pipes, I have the set of template connections on every single corner of the building, and this helps immensely to manage total of 4 water pipes per building. Next thing was to manage the power switch setup, and I am enjoyer of 3 switch setup for the power plants. 1 main power switch to cut off the main grid from generators, 1 switch to have internal connection of generators and backup batteries, and 1 more switch to bypass battery connection to main power grid if necessary. This easy setup allows for every feasible use case. You can shut off generators and charge batteries with external power source, or you can separate backup to be an actual backup while connecting generators to the main power grid. Alright, before I will explain interesting tips of a Brutalist exterior in this power plant, I want to thank all my Patreon members supporting my work. Your support truly makes this channel possible, especially in the reality where I'm still not able to get my revenue from the YouTube ads. AdSense shenanigans take some time to resolve, and I still have no idea when I would get this channel back on track, so your support on Patreon means literally everything for this channel at this point. Now, let's talk the exterior. Brutalist design in Satisfactory, well, it is a thing. Very concrete thing. But there are some bits that are, well, quite interesting about this design. First, the shaft. It is overextending beyond the facade of 5x5 blueprint, and as some of you can probably know, the collision box of a normal wall is straight in the middle. This allows to place walls overlapping the edge of the blueprint designer with the use of the notch tool with the button H. Next interesting part was to utilize the pipes as vertical facade breaking point. So those horizontal pipes, they are, well, all decorative, although it fits nicely with the theme of fuel power plant. One of the tricks here was to make the double wall side by side with the shaft itself. This required to use the notch tool with the half steps while holding the control key. Once you place the pipeline wall hose, you just remove the new wall, and now those connection points for the pipes would just never be visible inside of the shaft. Another neat trick with the half steps was to make windows slightly indented into the facade, and to round off the indented look, I just placed the painted beams around those indented windows. For the checkers formation, I am using normal Satisfactory walls painted carbon black, and for the concrete corners, I am using copper paint. All the pipes are painted into unpainted paint, since it makes for a nice paint. Once again, I made several variations of top blueprints, one in 5x5 and two in 6x6 designers. Personally, I enjoy 6x6 a bit more, and you can import any size of the blueprint into any save once you have unlocked the blueprint designer as early as well, the Mark 1. If you download my blueprint pack, as usual, you will have the readme file with the installation instructions there and also color reference sheet. This was Fuel Power Plant in Brutalist style, totally powered by Blueprint Designer. As always, thank you very much for watching, have a nice one, and Yakez is out to think about nuclear power plants.